It is my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker. Tony Hoffman, after paroling prison on December 13, 2008, Tony started living out his dream with his addiction behind him. Tony is a former BMX elite pro and placed second at the 2016 World Championship in Medellin, Colombia in the Masters Pro class. Tony coached women's elite pro Brooke Crane to a fourth place finish at the 2016 Rio Olympic Games in Brazil. Tony has presented on the prestigious TEDx stage, and his Goalcast video that went viral in February of 2020 has been viewed more than 12 million times. He's the founder and director of the Free Wheel Project, a nonprofit organization that mentors thousands of youth through action sports. Today, Tony is an author of one of the most requested mental health and substance use speakers in the country, traveling over 200 days a year to share an inspiring story with various audiences. In 2022, Tony will be opening his treatment center, PH Wellness, where he plans to continue his dream of leading people from the depths of addiction to the fulfillment of sobriety and a life of purpose. Welcome, Tony.
When I started, I guess I was considered too young of a person to sit in front of an audience like this. And this has now become my main type of audience. And I think about 6 months ago, I got a message from a local person. I actually moved from California to Texas 2 years ago. And I got a message from an individual that I knew for quite some time. And I was sharing my story on Instagram. And a lot of times people, like, you still tell your story? And she said, you know, Tony, like, you're a very successful entrepreneur now. Like, that's what you should be speaking about. And she hadn't heard me speak in like 4 or 5 years. When she heard me speak, what I was doing was really just telling my story. In my recovery, what I was still trying to do was just inspire people to feel the fire that I felt when I got into recovery and was ready to make changes in my life, for them to feel that fire, go out in the world and do the same thing for themselves and others at the same time. And then about 3 years ago, I had a breakthrough in therapy. And that breakthrough in therapy led me to this bed of water that I had never seen before, that had helped me understand my situation and other people's situations. And I told her, Liz, I don't think you understand what my mission is and what I'm doing. I don't want to stand in front of a bunch of people and tell everybody you can make $1 million, because you can start a business and make $1 million and still have no purpose. Like, what I'm doing when I grab the microphone isn't about success. My life story isn't about success. It's about experiences. How I experience things, how I went through these experiences, what I've learned from them, and sharing them with people to broaden their perspectives, increase their knowledge, and give them the inspiration to then take that out into their communities and make change. And so I'm so grateful that I still get to tell my story, because it still today feels like the first time I picked up a microphone after 13 years. I don't care if I get 3 hours of sleep because I was flying across the country, leaving an event in California to get here. I would still feel like this was the first time, and I love getting to do what I get to do. And so I hope today there's something that comes from my story and the knowledge that I've gained in my time that helps you in the community that you're in. I grew up in California, Central California. I tell people there's no beach where I'm from. 30% of the world's produce is grown in a 150-mile radius around the town that I came from. Fresno County is the ag capital of the world. My parents moved to Fresno County because in Fresno County is a little city called Clovis. My parents wanted to move to Clovis because they were known for their public schools. At the time my parents moved there, they were one of the top public schools in the United States, and they wanted me and my brother to get a good education. So I grew up inside Clovis Unified School District. And when I started going to school, I found out that Clovis Unified was not just known for their academics, they were also known for their sports programs. Back-to-back national baseball champions at Clovis High School. The United States best wrestlers come from Clovis North and Buchanan High School every single year. Some of the best football programs, basketball programs, all nationally recognized. So I started getting involved in sports in Clovis because that's what we did.
My first dream when I was a young kid was to go to the NBA. I found out when I was young, I was gifted at all sports though: basketball, baseball, soccer, rollerblades, skateboards, BMX bikes, volleyball, tennis. But my dream, it was to put that ball in the hoop in the league. I told my dad I was going to graduate from the University of Michigan. After I graduated from the University of Michigan, I told my dad I was going to go to the NBA. By the time I got to sixth grade, the high school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. The middle school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. It was really clear the short white kid from the middle of California could play basketball. But when I got to seventh grade, some things changed. When I got to seventh grade, some things changed that people couldn't see. See, when I got to seventh grade, I started showing up to campus and I had these overwhelming thoughts that I needed to kill myself. And I didn't understand where they were coming from. The only thing I knew is that I got to campus and everybody wanted to be like me because I could play sports better than everybody else in my community, but they didn't know that I didn't want to be myself. And because I didn't want to be myself and I was struggling with these things that people didn't see, I started to believe that the only way that I could fix the situation I was going through was to kill myself. I had these feelings that I didn't like about myself. I'd try to stop them. The more I tried to stop them, the more they came back. The more they came back, the more I looked at people around me and started thinking to myself, these individuals aren't having the struggles I'm having, and these individuals I'm looking at won't understand my situation if I talked about it, because vulnerability wasn't something that we tried to get individuals to experience or be a part of when we were younger. There was no conversations about mental health. So I started to believe that I was the problem. And when I started to believe that I was the problem and I was the only one that was struggling with the stuff that I was struggling with, it's when the self-hatred started. See, what I didn't understand at 12 years old was I had social anxiety. So when I came to school and the girls and the guys started exchanging phone numbers and calling each other, and all the guys started clicking up and hanging out in big groups, I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't understand why. I just knew that I had this feeling that I didn't like about myself that caused me to isolate. When I started isolating away from individuals, really what I was doing was giving life to depression, because every single person in this world is supposed to be connected. And through this connection, we experience this spark in our spirit, in our souls. When we think about what's happened with all the young individuals, when we disconnected them and we put them into these virtual classrooms, was we took them away from an environment that gives them structure, routine, and it leans into this thing called discipline and helps them to connect with their peers. It gets them away from sometimes these environments that are inducing some of these things that we're trying to help individuals get through. When I started isolating, it wasn't because of a pandemic. It was because I felt that my peers wouldn't understand me, and the anxiety that I was having was causing me to disassociate with the people around me. So I started to isolate on my own. When I started to isolate on my own, I started to get depressed. When I started getting depressed, I didn't want to play basketball. When I started getting depressed, I didn't want to show up to school. When I started getting depressed, there was very little conversation with anybody else. And one of my biggest struggles starting in middle school was this relationship that I was having with my father. I would sit down in the basketball seats before the basketball game started. I'd sit next to all my teammates. I'd look to the end of the gym doors and I'd have a conversation with myself before these basketball games would start every single time. I'd say, "Come on, Dad. Come on, Dad. You promised me. You told me you were getting off of work this time." See, what I didn't understand at 12 years old is why when I sat down in these seats next to my teammates, I saw Richie's mom and dad come through the door for every game. I didn't understand why I got to see Jeff's mom walk through the door for every single game. Jose's mom and dad came to every single game. Brent's dad not only came to the games, this dude's dad came to every single practice. And I started thinking to myself, why can't my hero come through those doors? What's wrong with me that my hero can't come through those doors? My father was my hero. And I believe every single person in this room and every single person in this room has a hero. And here's the catch. You don't get to choose your hero. It's just something you're born with. My brother doesn't look to my father for validation. He looks to my mom. I don't look to my mom for validation. I love my mom. She's always gone to bat for me. When I went to court, my dad didn't show up. My dad has social anxiety too, but shame and guilt would keep him in the house. My mom was the one that always showed up for me, but I wasn't looking for my mom to show up for me. And I don't know why. I was always looking for my father to show up for me. And when my father wasn't showing up to these basketball games, I started to believe these things about myself that were untrue. And what I learned, what I didn't understand and what I learned later in life was that the story we create about the experience that we're having is more important than the experience itself, because the story you create about your experience is the reason you do what you do in the world. And see, what I didn't realize was that at 12 years old, I was about to create a belief system about myself, a process that everybody in this room has already gone through as a result of their childhood experiences and what the institution was like, the schools that they went to. I created a belief system about myself, not knowing that this was actually happening. And I found out there's only two types of belief systems that are in the world. I can, I will, and I'm able, or I can't, I won't, and I'm not able. The unfortunate thing about this process of creating belief systems is some individuals grow up in situations that are extremely unfair. Some people grow up in situations where there's inequality that they're experiencing, and as a result of this inequality, the environment itself is teaching them things about themselves that are completely untrue. And because you develop a belief system when you're so young, you don't actually realize that what you're creating about yourself is going to be the reason you do what you do on a daily basis. At 12 years old, I believed my father wasn't showing up to my basketball games because he didn't love me. At 12 years old, I was showing up to these basketball games waiting for my father to come through, but he wasn't coming through because I'm not good enough. If I was good enough, my father would come to my basketball games, surely. And I got to see all my teammates who I started to believe were better than me, because they were having a different experience, an experience I wanted to see they got to have. But I had no idea what they were experiencing because we didn't encourage vulnerability. We didn't talk about each other's lives and what was going on at home. See, when I was a young kid, they said, stay away from kids who smoke weed and drink because they're bad kids. It was really simple when I was a young kid. Stay away from kids who make bad decisions because they're bad people that make bad decisions. Bad people make bad decisions that influence good people to do bad things, which is completely wrong. Turns out it's completely wrong. In 2017, I was about to give a keynote speech at a national conference on addiction and mental health. They gave me a brochure with a bunch of statistics on it before I gave my speech. One of the statistics on there is one of the big things that changed my life and gave me a deeper dive into perspective about what's happening. It said that 68% of kids who smoke weed, use nicotine products, drink alcohol, or use any type of other drug, 68%, if they've started before the age of 14, have been sexually abused. 68% of kids who start before the age of 14, nicotine products, alcohol, drugs, mind-altering substances, 68% of them have been sexually abused. And the reason that this is important is because still across the United States, what we do to young individuals, young females that are 10, 11, 12, 13, young men 10, 11, 12, 13, when they show up to school and they don't behave the way the other kids do, what we do as a system is kick them out of school, without recognizing that we're kicking an individual out that's already on the pathway of disassociation. And the reason that they're probably on the path of disassociation is because of an experience they're having at home that they shouldn't be having. See, what we have to recognize is that experiences create emotions. Once the emotion is created, there's now a story that happens about this experience and the emotions that they're experiencing. And once you create the story, it creates a belief system, then creates the behavior. If we don't start changing the way we look at mental health and how trauma is a big part of mental health, and realizing that everybody's reality about their experiences is mental health, it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. Mine was emotional neglect. But if we don't start recognizing that there are things that happen to human beings that create uncomfortable emotions, which are really the driver for why an individual seeks out something to regulate themselves, then we're going to continue to kick out individuals that are already creating belief systems. I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able. Because why would an individual who goes home to a house who is the victim of sexual trauma repeatedly, who now has an anxiety disorder as a result of this trauma, and in this house is not being provided any type of empowering coping skills. Show up to classroom looking for some type of connection. Somebody, something to help them through this experience that they don't even probably want to talk about. And when they don't behave, we just kick them out of school. What are we actually telling this person? My encouragement to the government here, and I'm going to say this boldly, you can use as many statistics in front of kids as you want. You can tell them how many people are dying every single year from fentanyl. It's not going to work, and I'm going to tell you that right now to your face. Because that doesn't tell the young girl who's 12 years old who has picked up a nicotine product or picked up the pills she found in that house and was being sexually abused, and it's created an anxiety disorder, or she's struggling with these other mental health aspects. When she picks up that nicotine product or she picks up that pill for the first time and she finally experiences relief from something she doesn't even want to be experiencing, you're not speaking to her. You're not speaking to him. You're not speaking to the why this is working for them, because they're not going to see that they're going to die from something. I can tell you right now, when I got involved in substances, I didn't think to myself I was going to be homeless and end up in prison and start robbing people for stuff. That was never the idea. The idea was subconsciously me trying to escape from the experiences and the feelings that I was having that started when I was a young person. What we have to do is start speaking to the people who are struggling with their mental health directly and empower them out of the situation that they're in. What we have to do is create programs where individuals can connect. We need to be able to do things like create different types of music outlets in schools. I tell people all the time, the same band stuff has been in schools since the beginning of time. But I don't actually know anybody that plays a trombone. I don't. It doesn't mean that it's not a great instrument that we should use, but let me explain something. If we sit outside right now and we stand at this street corner, in an hour's time, I guarantee you that we will hear at least 25 cars playing hip hop music. I've only heard of one school in Miami in all of my speaking that has a studio on campus. Kids are immersed. The world is connected through hip hop music. It's the most listened to genre in the world. And yet schools still don't recognize hip hop as music. Because they'll tell you, oh, but the message behind rap, it's drug dealing and violence and gangs. Well, not at school if you have a mentor. You wouldn't engage kids in these types of lyrics, but you would engage kids in something they're interested in. And by engaging them in something they're interested in, then you folks in this room can provide services into these programs that are trying to change the conversation that individuals are having about themselves. It's not about education and statistics. It's about changing the conversation from I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able to I can, I will, and I am able. Another thing that I tell people is you can still have a pen, a piece of paper, and a camera. And you can walk around school and you can start the process of learning journalism. But most schools in the United States don't let you carry this. And on the other side and on the screen have TikTok. Yet I got a friend who oversees one of the largest circuses in Las Vegas in the world, who started with graphic design and has evolved into a social media expert in which he's able to promote these individuals that are a part of this circus and now make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Journalism in schools should also be TikTok and learning how to use social media and creating environments. The schools always tell me, but kids don't engage in our social media. Well, yeah, boomer, because when you take a picture and you just post it on Instagram, who wants to engage in that? None of the Gen Zs do. They're looking for engaging videos. Well, you have kids on your campus, I promise you, who are in the process of being disassociated, that are very gifted in a creative way. And this is where their gift belongs. They need somebody to help them find that gift and use that gift to change the conversation about what's happening at home and what that means to themselves. So when they see this, they see freedom. When they see this, they see connecting with other individuals. When they see this, they see taking your story and making it something that's known all over the world, because what they can do with these, I can't. There's a reason why my social media is pretty boring, because I'm not a creative person. So yeah, I just post pictures, but there are other individuals that are able to do that. And so my encouragement to government is to make sure that we're not overly focusing on statistics, but we're focusing on ways to connect other individuals that are like-minded, that empower each other to overcome situations through vulnerability. When we can provide programs in a group and we can teach vulnerability and talk about all of our experiences, then we can learn about other people's life stories. And when we learn about other people's life stories, we also learn that many of us are going through the same or similar things, or feel just like somebody else who's experiencing something different. And this connection creates empowerment. And empowerment is where we see change. At 12 years old, I had no idea that because of my father's emotional neglect that wasn't intentional, I was about to believe I can't, I won't, I'll never be able. I couldn't make sense of my anxiety. I couldn't make sense of my self-hatred. I couldn't make sense of the gift of playing sports that I had. And so I decided, if my dad doesn't care, why should I? Immediately, I became that kid. 7th grade, I get kicked out, selling girl weed. I wanted to be a cool kid. This girl came up to me, she says, I'm looking for some weed. You know, I can get some weed at? I said, yeah, I know I can get some weed at. This guy in my guitar class always talking about smoking weed. Got her the weed, she gets caught with it. When she gets caught with it, I get kicked out of 7th grade. I find a BMX bike at this time. I find the BMX bike, my brother was already racing. My dad says you need to go out to the BMX track on the weekends. So I started going out, and then my dad says, hey, why don't you try racing? I said, all right, I'll try. By the time I was 18, I was on the cover of the largest BMX racing magazine in the world. I was ranked #1 in the country in points. I was sponsored by Fox Racing, Airwalk Shoes, and Spy Sunglasses. Companies that didn't sponsor amateur athletes were sponsoring me because they believed when I turned pro, I was going to be one of the best in the sport. And most people would have said, don't worry about Hoff. He's going to go off, race BMX, and be super successful. But they had no idea that when I took my helmet off, I wanted to kill myself. When I took my helmet off, I had anxiety struggles. And when I took my helmet off, I had depression issues. I had Saturday school every single weekend my senior year in high school. And if I brought my English teacher up here right now, she'd tell you that I didn't come to her class first period every single day because I was a punk. Because that's what we thought about kids like myself. What she didn't understand, and what my people around me didn't understand, was the first drug that I ever took to help my struggles was sleep. When I was asleep, I didn't feel anxiety. When I was asleep, I didn't think about killing myself. When I was asleep, I wasn't worried about anything. My mother and father were workaholics. They got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they came home at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't have anything modeled to me to show me how to deal with my struggles, so I had to teach myself. The first thing I taught myself was if I was asleep, I didn't have to feel. People had no idea that even being on the cover of a magazine with thousands of dollars of merchandise showing up to my doorstep every other week, that on the inside, I hated who I was and it didn't fix anything. And I didn't want to race BMX. The average BMXer makes $10,000 to $15,000 a year. Is Kyle, right? We were just talking about coaching BMX. You make $250 a month as a BMX coach, even if you're a coach that takes people to the Olympics. There's not a lot of money in the sport. And I knew this when I was younger. And when I was younger, I also thought life's all about making money. If I just made a lot of money, had a big house, nice car, married a good-looking wife, that all the stuff that I was struggling with would work itself out by me achieving these things that I thought that I needed. And then I found out that's actually not true either. So while I was a senior in high school, my social anxiety led me to my bedroom. I spent a lot of time in my bedroom learning how to build corporate computer networks. It's not about going to the NBA anymore or racing BMX professionally. I want to become a network administrator for a big corporation so I can sit in an office where no people get to go, and your only form of communication with me is going to be through an email. My social anxiety would really appreciate that. That's why I love text messaging people. You know, I'm the guy that you call and I forward you to voicemail and then just text you, hey, what do you want? Because my social anxiety would much rather have that. So I had built up this reputation and this knowledge of building corporate computer networks by my senior year in high school. I was Cisco certified, Microsoft certified professional, had my A+, all self-taught in a bedroom with 7 computers and a laptop. I got offered $120,000 a year my senior year in high school to go work for this guy that was Entrepreneur of the Year of California at 23 years old. He was inventing 802.11b wireless internet radios and was going to be the first person in the United States to put this radio on a tower and beam wireless internet into these rich neighborhoods in San Diego, California. My aunt knew his wife, who connected me with his husband. He interviewed me and said, "You're the person I'm looking for. Move down here the day after you graduate. Here's what I'm offering you." When he offered me this job, I put my gift away. My gift was racing my bicycle. And what I tell people is we all need 2 things to keep our mental wellness in balance. One is a safe place to have a conversation. That safe place to have a conversation is where you can be vulnerable and talk about your experience. On the other side, there is no shame or judgment or anything that makes you feel like something is wrong with you as a result of sharing this experience. The other thing that each of us need is an activity that connects us with like-minded individuals. The catch is it has to be empowering for self and others. If you can achieve those 2 things in your life, you will find that you will ride the waves of life, but you will never see these huge peaks and valleys, because what you do on a daily basis keeps those peaks from going really high and really low. I had my bike, and it connected me with other like-minded individuals. It was empowering for myself and others. When I put my bike away, all I had was this: the conversations I had with myself. I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able. It didn't matter if I was on the cover of a magazine. It didn't matter if people told me to my face, "Hoff, you're the best athlete this town has ever had. Hoff, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread." I would have never actually felt that on the inside. When I put my gift away, I had my conversations with myself, and I started going to parties. Saw people smoke weed and drink at parties, said, "I don't need to do this." But I know this: when I went to parties, I hated myself more. And when I went to parties, I started to wonder. And the reason I hated myself more was because when the keg got tapped and the lights turned on and the music flipped on, I wasn't dancing with people. I wasn't doing keg stands, and I wasn't running around with a red cup in my hand, laughing and smiling like everybody else. I stood against the wall. I stood against the wall and watched everybody else look like they were having a good time and thought to myself, why can't I be like them and have a good time? And I kept this conversation going that something was wrong with myself. Then I told my friend Steve, "Smoke me out, bro. I want to try smoking weed." I smoked weed for the first time. I couldn't stop laughing. I was laughing for hours. I thought to myself, well, this ain't all that bad. But it wasn't helping my anxiety, my depression, any of my mental health struggles, and it wasn't helping the conversation with myself. I told myself, I don't want to smoke weed every single day like my friends do. Maybe I'll just smoke once a month. The next weekend came by. My friends circled up at a party. They started smoking. They said, "Hop, you want to smoke?" I said, "Yeah. But I don't want to smoke weed every single day like my friends do. Maybe I'll just smoke on the weekends." Wednesday comes by. We're at my boy Tone's house on the Xbox. My friends started smoking. They said, "Hop, you want to smoke?" I said, "Yeah, I'll smoke." Next thing you know, I'm smoking weed every single day, just like my friends do. What we didn't understand at 18 years old was that there's a doorway that exists, and you can't see the door because it's invisible. But what I've learned is when you walk through the door and you step all the way through, you don't get to just turn around and walk back out because you think you're done. That's not the way it works. I've been sober for 15 years on May 17th, and I've only seen people walk through this door. Thank you. I try not to be too proud of myself or anything, but man, I'm proud of that 15 years because they didn't think I was getting here. I've only seen people walk through this door and get back out 2 different ways. One is the way 14 kids that I went to high school with went through and got back out in caskets. Since I graduated high school, 14 kids that sat around me in auditoriums have died from drug overdoses, and the number keeps growing, and it's going to keep growing because you don't just get to walk out because you think you're done. Doesn't mean that millions of people aren't finding their way out of the door. It just means that our job is to stop individuals from going through the door. And if we think putting up a sign in front of that door that says, "Stop, don't go through, you might lose your life," is going to stop individuals from going through the door, they're going to keep going through, because empowerment And changing the conversation is the only reason people don't want to go through, is because what they feel about themselves and their situation is so much stronger than what the other side of that door is offering. Because see, when I was a kid, I would have said, we're just smoking weed for a good time. It's just weed. Nowadays, you could say it's going to be legal in all 50 states in the next 10 years. Everybody's going broke. Weed's going to save us all from going broke. So governments are just legalizing weed and open up weed shops everywhere. When the reality is we weren't actually doing it for a good time. Turns out my friend Yoshi that went through the door, he was gay, that grew up in a conservative community and believed that if he came out about his identity, his mother, father, and his friends would just never talk to him again. So he held on to his identity. My friend Jeff that I played basketball with, his mom might have showed up to every single game, but he wouldn't tell you where his dad was because he didn't know either. His mother and father got divorced when he was a young kid and his dad disappeared. Then his mother became promiscuous, and he started to believe these men that she was with were more important to her than he was. He developed the same self-image that I did with my experience with my father, with his experience with his mother. My friend Adam didn't talk about the sexual and physical abuse that he was going through when he was a kid, and you wouldn't think those kinds of things ever happened in an upper middle class neighborhood that I grew up in. It wasn't until like his 20th try in rehab in his 30s that he started talking about how he was sexually abused as a child. And that was actually creating the emotions and the self-conversation that drove him through the door. But at 18 years old, young minds, we all would have told you that the only reason that we're doing this is just to have a good time. But the truth was, every single one of us were struggling with our mental health and the conversation that we had, and it was driving us through the door. And all we were looking for was some relief from the experiences that we were having. And many of us having these experiences that at this time, we weren't actually creating. At 18 years old, I told myself I'm just smoking weed, went down to San Diego to take the computer job. It didn't work out. It didn't work out. Years later, I found out the guy I went to work for was wanted by the FBI for stealing $28 million. He was a Ponzi scheme scam artist. I didn't understand why the job wasn't working out. Now I know why. But when it wasn't working out, I didn't think to myself, when I went to his house and there was a problem on a computer, this guy's answer is to start punching the computer. I knew something was wrong, but when the job didn't work out, I didn't connect the two, that maybe this guy isn't who he says he is, because I can't remember ever punching a computer in my room to try and fix it. It never worked that way. What I did was say there's something wrong with me. He doesn't have the courage to tell you that you're not good enough. And so he's going to play this out until I quit. So the self-conversation that started when I was 12 just carried into every experience that I was having in my life. I needed something to empower me away from that conversation, something to help teach me something better about myself, that would go into a situation and have that conversation that had become naturally instinct, and then have a better side to myself that could challenge that conversation and say, no, that's not actually true. I can, I will, and I'm able. So I quit and I went home to Fresno, California, started partying again, and my friend introduced me to Oxycontin. My friend says, you want to split this pill with me? I said, yeah, I'll split it with you. Came from a doctor. We thought because it came out of an orange bottle that it would be safe. Then we found out sometimes the stuff that comes out of the orange bottle is no different than the stuff that comes from the cartel. It's just packaged different. And because it was packaged different, we thought it was safe. But something different about Oxycontin happened to me compared to everything else that I had tried. Because when I tried Oxycontin, instantly, my anxiety was gone. My suicidal ideation was gone. My depression was gone. I thought to myself, I'm fixed. You mean to tell me all I got to do is split this green pill in half and it all goes away? Like, why don't the doctors give me this? I don't want Zyprexa. I don't want Paxil. I don't want lithium. I don't want Prozac. I don't want Wellbutrin. I don't want these drugs that make me feel like I'm not a person. Oxycontin gives me energy. It makes me feel hopeful. It makes me love who I am. I thought to myself, this is what I want. And immediately I'm starting to make this connection in years of recovery of what's happening to the young girl or the young boy that's sexually abused, or the person that goes home and experiences mom and dad yelling and throwing things and slamming doors and violence, or dad's leaving or mom's leaving and they're home alone, because that happens too. I had a guy at my treatment center 6 weeks ago. I sat down and got to know his story. He told me what it was like to be an 8-year-old boy tortured by his stepmother. We didn't hear these stories when I was a kid. That happens to people? What? Yeah, the kid was 8 years old. He'd get tied to the front of a bed naked. The dad was cheating on the stepmom, and this was the way the stepmom dealt with it. Tied him to a bed naked, turned the air conditioner down as low as it could, and if he fell asleep, she poured ice cold water on him. I say, how did that make you feel? Confused and angry. I said, why did that make you confused? He said, because at 8 years old, I didn't understand why this was happening to me. I didn't want this to happen. I said, why did it make you angry? He said, because my dad wasn't there to help me. Nobody showed up and walked through those doors, my house, to untie me, to bring me a blanket. I said, have you ever felt anger and confusion again in your life? He said, when my daughter died when I was 22. I wanted him to understand that anger and confusion may be the root to him wanting to use and regulate his emotions. Because at 8 years old, he was experiencing these emotions that somebody else created in his life that he didn't like. And he found a bottle of alcohol at 11, found himself in the juvenile justice system by 13 years old. Had not seen a day sober in 18 years. It wasn't until I did the work in recovery that I realized that at 18 years old, when I found OxyContin, I found the substance that many young individuals are finding at a very young age that can fix what I thought was broken. But the doorway makes you think you're getting fixed. No person goes into this thinking, oh, this is what's going to happen in my life. Oh, I'm going to die. We're just trying to fix ourselves. Even if you're a person that's not drug addicted, substance addicted, you're still trying to fix yourself with coffee, with the gym, with your relationships, with therapy. There's all types of ways that we're trying to fix ourselves. Not every single one is through the doorway to use substances. But when I found OxyContin, I thought it was the answer, not realizing the stuff on the other side of the doorway actually isn't fixing me. It's stopping me from feeling. And that when we stop ourselves from feeling, we're not actually growing. We're actually making things worse, because then when we become addicted to the substance, when we don't have the substance, we feel more unsafe than we did before we actually went through the door, which creates the craving behind the substance, because the substance is safety. At 18 years old, I had no idea that I was involved in a drug that was no different than heroin. By 21 years old, I made the biggest mistake of my entire life. My parents kicked me out of the house. They found a quarter-pound of weed in my backpack. I started living with some kids I went to high school with. We couldn't get the pills anymore. We started going through the withdrawals. The worst flu times 100 is what I tell people. It makes you do whatever it takes to get it. At 21 years old, I armed myself with a gun. I went to a neighborhood with a co-defendant. We entered a home where people were there, and we committed a home invasion robbery for OxyContin that were in the house. And the person that we robbed was one of our best friend's moms. She had multiple sclerosis and was getting prescribed so many of these OxyContins. And he, like many other kids, was stealing the pills from his house and bringing them to us and selling them to us for $5 a piece. $40 pill on the street, we were getting them for $5. She caught him, and when she caught him, she started locking him up. Back in the early 2000s, there wasn't enough people selling their prescriptions. And if y'all been around long enough in this opioid epidemic, the pharmacies used to run out every single month. And when the pharmacies ran out, it was like a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off running around trying to find these things. Even the people that were getting them legally were running around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to find these things. And so when we couldn't get them from her, there wasn't enough people selling them on the street. We would go through the droughts, which would create the withdrawal experiences. And we made the worst decision I've ever made in my life. And it was to go inside and rob one of our friend's mothers for her prescription pills. When I got out of the house, I told myself I would never rob somebody ever again, from the shame and the guilt that I felt immediately when my car pulled up and I got inside of it. My co-defendants kept robbing people though. They kept robbing people and ended up on the news. When they ended up on the news, the lady we robbed saw my co-defendant on TV and said that guy was in my house. Started an investigation around all my friends. 30 days later, or six months later, the cops found out where I was staying. They raided the place and they took me to jail. I hadn't seen my family in 3 years. No phone calls, Christmas, Thanksgiving, nothing. I called my dad from Fresno County Jail and I said, Dad, I'm in Fresno County Jail for armed robbery. Can you help me? My dad says, I'm not helping you. What do you want me to do? This is your problem. You need to deal with it. I said, Dad, please, can you get me an attorney? I don't want to go to prison. My dad says, I don't know who to get. I said, can you look this guy, Michael Idiard, up? I said, these drug dealers I'm running with, they're getting this guy. If they get busted and they go to court, they're not going to prison. So I called my dad the next day and my dad says, son, this guy wants $30,000 to walk into a courtroom one time. We don't got that kind of money. He said, but your mother and father, we had a conversation. We're going to pull the money out of my retirement account. We're going to get you this attorney. Hopefully I get my son back and you can get your life back. What my dad thought at that time was drug addiction's a choice. So if he just threw money at the doorway, his money would pull me outside of the door. I would wake up to this fact that drugs, the fun that I think I'm having from the drugs, don't outweigh the consequences that come with using drugs. That big sign that says these are the consequences. My dad thinks that I'm having fun using at this time and that I'm choosing to have fun, but this fun is going to lead me to consequences that far outweigh that. What he didn't realize was the only place of safety I ever felt was under the influence. For those of us in recovery in this room, by show of hands, how many of them are in here? There's a few of us, and we all look a little mature here. We've all met that person. We've all met that person that says, I never really liked drugs because I don't like feeling like I'm out of control. I like to feel like I'm in control. And when I did this, I felt out of control. Now, let me give you my perspective. When I'm sober, I don't feel like I'm in control. I feel like that person feels when they're under the influence. When I take OxyContin, I feel in control. I was trying to achieve the same thing that they are achieving with their sobriety. I was trying to achieve it, only found it while I was under the influence. So my father thought it was a choice, not recognizing that really what I was doing was trying to regulate myself to a place of safety. Then when the addiction occurred, which isn't a choice, I no longer could think logically. My brain could only focus on getting this substance because the substance was the safety that the normal person gets to experience without the substance. So I went to courtroom at 21 years old with this. And one of the top defense attorneys in the state of California. I also came from quote unquote the good side of town. And I didn't understand about this experience until I got there. Because at 21 years old with some privileges I didn't even know were existent, and that some individuals could go to court with the opposite skin color of me without this big wig attorney and go to jail for a lot longer period of time for far less than I did. When I went there, I thought to myself, I need to get this attorney, stay out of prison. Then all of a sudden I get introduced to these things where if I show up to court with these things, I can be treated completely different than the person that I became friends with back at the cell. Because see, at 21 years old for armed robbery, I went from facing 17 and a half years in prison with a public defender to leaving with 5 years felony probation, 1 strike on my record, and 90 days in a treatment center because I went in with the top defense attorney from California, one of them. My friend Tudabug, though, who was a D1 scholarship offer, came from the west side of Fresno, had black color skin and a public defender. He was picked up from football practice after high school one day, and 2 of his friends from the neighborhood picked him up. Read the police reports. This is the God honest truth. They were 25 and 27 years old. Both said that Tudabug had nothing to do with this. When he got into the car, he didn't realize that the 2 people in the back were being kidnapped and robbed. The judge told Tuda because he didn't get out of the car that he had to go to prison for 17 years. I remember when he came back in tears because my story and what I was experiencing was giving him hope. Well, shoots, if this guy's only going to get 5 years felony probation and this is his first offense and he's a sports star just like me, maybe they're going to do the same thing for me. It's not what they did for him, because the reality was Tuda came from a street called Strother in West Fresno that was known for Crip gang members. And the message we gave Tuda was, we believe because you were in the car with 2 other Crip gang members, that you're probably a Crip gang member yourself. So if we get rid of you now, we don't have to deal with you later. And the only reason we looked at him as a liability and not an asset or an opportunity was because he went to court with a different color skin than me. I truly believe that. And because of that, I hope this entire room is continuing that conversation and that we're not just focusing on prevention and making sure that individuals don't use substances to try and cope with their experiences, but we're trying to create more equitable neighborhoods and equal opportunities for individuals that I believe have the ability to do great things regardless of the color of their skin. I told my dad, they gave this guy 20 or 17 years. And my father said, you know, son, if you're seeing that things are unfair, this means you're going to have to get out and do something for yourself and Tuda. And I thought that that was going to be it. I don't want to go to prison for 10 years. The judge told me, if you come in my courtroom for anything, I'm going to give you all 10 years that I'm supposed to be giving you right now. Do you understand me, Mr. Hoffman? And I thought to myself, yes, sir. I thought those consequences, that fear, that sign that says, don't go through this door, was going to stop me. But it wasn't, because what was driving me was something people couldn't see. I get out of treatment 90 days later. I'm drinking at a party. I knock a guy's tooth out in a fight. And after I knock this guy's tooth out in a fight, I go to the hospital 2 weeks later and I almost happen to have my hand cut off in surgery. I had an infection in my hand, and they gave me a Vicodin prescription, cut out the infection in my hand. The Vicodin prescription sent me back down this road of craving after these opioids. I left my family. 3 days later, I stole the pills and I walked out on my family. And for the next 2.5 years, my life would spin completely out of control. Completely out of control to the point that I became homeless. Completely out of control to the point that using needles, things like methamphetamine, crack cocaine, all the stuff that they told us in school would happen if you went through the door became my life. At the bottom, I never felt more hopeless than I had felt my entire life. How much time do I have? We done? Okay. All right. When I got to prison, I thought that I was going to redevelop my life and I was going to use prison as an opportunity to change the pathway that I was on. And I started changing my life one choice at a time. I realized that the small choices that we make in our life are the choices that get us to the destination that we want. I started with learning how to brush my teeth, make my bed, organize my stuff. I started asking myself, why do I feel this way? And why every time do I feel this, do I do this? It helped me become emotionally aware of myself. 5 months after getting out of prison, I raced my first professional BMX race I'd ever raced in my life. I took 3rd place. 1 year after being back on my bicycle, I got invited to the Olympic Training Center by the United States of America. My goal was to go to the Olympics, start a nonprofit organization, become a public speaker. I'm racing BMX at the highest level. The United States of America invites me to the Olympic Training Center. I started my nonprofit organization in 2012. I started public speaking 1 year after I got out of prison. By the time 2016 had come around, not too many years after that, I became one of the biggest coaches in the world for the sport of BMX. Coached 2 national champions, 2 world champions, 3 national champions, had 25 athletes from Australia to Bolivia. Became one of the biggest speakers in the world for mental health and substance use. By 2016, my nonprofit organization was raising over $120,000 a year, giving away $40,000 worth of bicycles, $10,000 worth of skateboards. In July of 2016, I became the first human being to start in a prison cell and make it to the Olympics by coaching Brooke Crane to a 4th place finish at the Rio Olympic Games. And since the Olympics, my life has been about holding this microphone, sharing my story, and now opening up PH Wellness, which is my treatment center that's focusing on some radically different ideas to increase long-term sobriety outcomes. Do we have any time for questions?
What we're going to do is we technically have a break in here. So if you want to go out and get some more coffee, just move quietly through the room. We want to take some questions in the audience that we have them, because I think we can take a break and do quite Q&A at the same time.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Because
Yeah.
and so does anybody have any questions? We'll bring a microphone to you if you have a question for Tony. Anybody have anything?
Questions?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
We'll start in the front.
First of all, thank you for your story and for the inclusion of the story of people who don't have the opportunity to share it. My question is, how do young people, or if I work with young people, get involved with your program or with a program related to what you do as far as the extreme sports are concerned?
Yeah, so my nonprofit organization as of 2017 has ceased to run programs. I tried to hire people to run it, and I don't know if you know, but raising money, once the face is kind of steps away, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And so we had to stop running programs, which is why I shifted gears to the treatment center. And then I opened up a new nonprofit called Merge Opportunities. Merge Opportunities is providing free mental health care and career placements. And we're working with specifically justice impacted individuals and individuals that are getting out of treatment centers. One of my business partners is half owner of a $1 billion staffing agency and has been in staffing his entire life, 5 years recovery. And so we're taking the treatment center and the nonprofit now as our new work that we're trying to do in the community. Gotcha. So would have loved to have you a part of the Free Will Project, but we've had to stop those programs.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. There was a question over here.
Hi, thank you so much, Tony. I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to share what you consider to be your pathway to recovery.
Sure. Yeah, my pathway to recovery is multifaceted. In the beginning, it was Christ-centered. I had a spiritual experience on January 21st, 2007. It led me to Christ. That was my foundation while I went through prison. At year 9, I adopted the 12-step program. I had made a mistake in a relationship and churches weren't open 7 days a week, all day long. And so I've kind of crawled into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and found myself involved in the 12-step program. I've been in therapy for over 10 years, in and out of therapy, to the point that now it's very difficult for me to sit down with a therapist and not know more than that therapist if they're not good. So I have to sit down with very educated therapists that understand trauma and mental health and substance use kind of together. I'm very involved in basketball. I go to basketball games still. That's a part of my recovery, is making sure that I'm engaging in that way. Speaking as a form of my recovery, and then giving back to communities. I do a lot for prisons and teen programs behind the scenes that I don't really talk too much about, because that's for me and for them personally. And then my dog is a big part of my therapy. Breathe work, big breathe work person, because that's helped my anxiety a lot. So it's multifaceted. I don't truly believe in just one single way. I think that we can use all these different tools available to us. You're welcome. Questions? Could be anything. Yeah.
This question basically is, I work for a school district, and I work for the SAP team, the Student Assistance Program, and we're charged with trying to help students who have problems in school that are non-academic. Of course, we find a lot of kids who are involved in drugs, vaping, have problems at home. There's a lot of connections that you've talked about and that we see in school as well. How do we balance, obviously, other than the programs that are in place that we're going to be learning about today, how do we balance the interests of these institution versus, and that is, in my case, education and making sure that all students are in a safe classroom and not being exposed to the difficulties that other students are going through no fault of their own because of home situations and whatnot? How do we balance institutional interests versus the interests of the students who are going through these issues?
Sure. I think number one, we need to focus on inclusion, not segregation, which means typically when we provide services to the individuals that you're talking about, we remove them from the group to provide it for them, which furthers the conversation that something is wrong with themselves. A young mind doesn't understand why what's happening is happening. What I think we need to do is focus more on inclusion by talking to the institution about providing services to the entire group. And we can break it down into interests. This is why creating more programs of interest for students is important, because if you have an athlete who's struggling with substance use, whether it's nicotine or marijuana, what we don't want to do is pluck them out of the team and try and help them. What we want to do is provide services to the entire team. The entire team needs to learn about vulnerability, mental health, substance use, so that individual can learn that there are other people in there that may be struggling, but also it gives an opportunity for the team to then become a real team. Because if you want to experience what a real team can do, then a real team knows every person there and what they're experiencing. And we know that some may be struggling more than others, and that's when the team gives them a hand and says, I'll be the hand that pulls you when you feel like you can't walk. So what we do is try and get with the institutions to garner interest by saying, this is what we want to do on an inclusionary standpoint. We want to provide services to the whole team, to the whole band. And if there's not something that they're involved in, then the job should be to get that person plugged into some type of interest group while we're working with them, and then try and include everybody else in how we can come together through vulnerability and make an impact. Truly, that's what I believe that we have to start focusing on, is trying to provide services to the mass. I think I'm done. Sorry, guys.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.